If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.
Welcome to Indoctrination, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
Trust. It's the foundation of every meaningful relationship, but how do you know when it's real and when it's not? In this exclusive 2-part series, I'll help you understand what real trust looks like and how to spot the signs of betrayal before it's too late. Whether it's family, friendship, romance, or work, Trust, the complete series, gives you the tools to protect your peace and better build connections. In part 1, I focus on the foundational principles of trust, explaining how it affects your freedom and your emotional well-being, while also discussing the impact of betrayal, which is so devastating. In part 2, I dive deeper into identifying subtle signs of trustworthiness, whether it's with family or friends or romantic partners or even colleagues. This lecture series and more are available for purchase on my website, rachelbernsteintherapy.com. Just follow the link in the description of this episode to view and purchase all of the available lecture videos there. Take good care. Hello, everyone. Today on the show, we have Dr. Peter Salerno, who has a PsyD as well as an LMFT. He is also an award-winning author, and he holds a Doctor of Psychology degree, a Master of Science degree in clinical psychology, and a Bachelor of Arts in English literature. Dr. Salerno is a trauma specialist, a clinical supervisor, and consultant who utilizes empirically validated, science-based approaches to promote healing and self-empowerment. Dr. Salerno is trained in EMDR, otherwise known as eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy, and accelerated resolution therapy, ART, and is certified in family trauma and complex trauma through the International Association of Trauma Professionals. He also holds certifications in psychoanalytic psychotherapy and personality disorder treatment, and is trained and qualified to administer and score the Hair Psychopathology Checklist Revised, PCLR. Dr. Salerno has treated mental health conditions in a variety of clinical settings and has authored 6 books on a broad number of topics, including stress and trauma, early development and attachment, and mind-body integration, emotion and cognition, personality, pathology, and philosophy. And Dr. Salerno currently works in private practice. So I hope that lets you know how qualified he is to be talking about this subject. My conversations with him are always really wonderful and so dynamic. And I am excited to be able to have you hear my second conversation with him today. And if you haven't already done so, please check out the first episode with him on it, which was wonderful and fascinating. Here is Dr. Salerno now. It is so nice to have Dr. Peter Salerno back with me and with us today. The last conversation was very impactful and illuminating and fun, actually, also. Even though we talked about you coming back on and I invited you back on, which is incredible, I feel like it could have also been seen as back by popular demand because there was so much dialogue on YouTube and on different Facebook pages and social media about what you talked about, and that you talked about it in a new way for people to hear it in a new way, and that you challenged a lot of the information that's out there by a lot of people who might know or who might not, who are quoting other people, and a lot gets transmitted that might not be connected to the scientific fundamentals of this, but just what the information someone has picked up from somebody else, and then it becomes sort of a psychological game of telephone, which is not, I think, ultimately so responsible. So welcome back. It's so nice to see you again.
It's nice to see you. Thank you for having me back.
It's so good also to talk about not only narcissism, but I think to be able to go into talking a little bit more about when we were talking about different traits showing up at a very young age, even the age of 4. If people haven't heard the last episode, please go back and do it. I highlighted a story of this 4-year-old girl who I had observed, who I think about often. And I think I need to remember her name and watch out for her, because I think she's going to do something one day, like start her own cult. And so I have to be familiar with her out there in the world. But there are other people like that. And just being able to have what seems to take the bravery to say, this is something that shows up in children, which is not a popular idea, because we know we want to give kids a chance to grow and to mature. And some do, and probably most do. But every once in a while, you see it differently. And then I also want to talk about traumatic cognitive dissonance. There was some responses to that. It really spoke to a lot of people. And then there were some follow-up questions that some of the listeners had that I wanted to ask you. And then open it up to wherever you would like to take it, with client experiences, with research you've done, and have it just be free flowing like our last conversation. And so maybe we'll start with the children. When you have traits that emerge of some sociopathy, of malignancy, when it comes to that level of narcissism at such a young age, one of the questions was, when you don't see the traits emerging until later, could it be that they didn't develop until later? Or could it be that they've been hiding them until they learned what they could get away with a little bit more and learned that they can now push the envelope a little bit more? Have they been laying in wait, or has it developed over time, or maybe both?
I would say it's both. It's a complicated question. It's not so much a complicated answer, but identifying which one is complicated. But it is both, in the sense that when we're talking about the biological underpinnings of trait excess, trait deficiency, everyone has a biologically based temperament. And then we have vulnerabilities to our environment that are highly influenced by that biology, which has been overlooked in psychology for a very long time in favor of environmental determinism. Everything is environmentally determined. You can shape or mold any kid to be anything. That's not true, but that actually is the prevailing notion in popular literature and popular media. When we're talking about these traits, there still is a developmental process. Just a couple of examples of some traits that are problematic, we'll say, like impulsivity and aggression. Those are present in kids, even in infancy, some kids, but there's still a developmental process for them to be expressed. And one of the processes is they consistently impair cognitive development. So it's like this internal battle in the child of, my cognition is motivated and influenced by this impulsivity and this aggression that are not coming from adversity. They're coming from my biology. They're negotiating that throughout their developmental process too, trying to make sense of it. So it can be that they're trying to hide these things. Kids are egocentric. They don't have the wiring to be selfless So part of that is taught, but a lot of it also is the resistance to that can also be biological. So basically, it can look like it's unfolding and only manifesting later because of the natural developmental process. It's been practiced enough times where now it's sort of being a little bit more set. It can also be that they're concealing it. But what we found out about antisocial behavior in teenagers specifically is that it triples from pre adolescence to the teenage years. So it's like that stage, everything is sort of rapidly developing. And it's not to say that they aren't present in younger ages, but there certainly is this developmental process of this is where they start to be more noticeable. So going back to your question, it could be that they're more noticeable because of that stage where things tend to triple, but it can also be that some of them are pretty good at masking, which is again, back to your point, it's a hard pill to swallow that young children could be potentially that manipulative. But there's just a wealth of evidence to show that some are. Now, the sooner you catch it, the sooner you can intervene, the more positive the outcome. So, what I encourage people to do is don't overlook it in the hopes that it's an age appropriate phase that's going to be outgrown. If it's an indicator and it's problematic and they're a minor, get them into treatment as soon as possible with someone who knows how to treat that, because that's going to increase the possibility that those tendencies can be reduced and more managed.
Right. I would love to talk to you about ways to intervene. And I know these are questions that are going to be personalized, of course, and for the ages and the culture, et cetera. But I think just to have a sense of what might help. What I've seen also before we even get into what might help is this idea that when I was observing this, and I've had experience working in therapeutic preschools and with kids who were setting fires to things, kids who were in multiple foster placements and who had learned certain behavior, who needed to know that they mattered in a lot of ways. And so there was a lot of history around that and the need for that, and the need then to have them do certain things, I think, just to make sure people knew they existed, which is a very sad state of affairs for kids that young. So I've had a lot of experience around kids who act in a different way and are managing their world in different ways. But I knew in that classroom that if I said something's wrong here, that would have made me seem unkind and that I'm not giving that child the benefit of the doubt. I also was worried that without an awareness that this can exist, that the blame would fall on the parents, because that becomes, I guess, predictable or maybe low-hanging fruit. Like, what are they not doing that they should be doing as parents? So some of the people who responded after hearing the episode were saying, I knew this. I could sense this about one of my kids or about my sibling. We were so different, had the exact same parenting, or my children, all same experiences. But something really stood out and was disarming and was uncomfortable. And I thought, uh-oh. Some of the parents who wrote in said, I just kept getting the sense of, uh-oh. And that there wasn't anyone to really talk to about that because it landed back on the parent. You need to show them more love, all the things that are really not, I think, ultimately helpful. And I also think there's a whole history of diagnostic misogyny, which is let's blame the mom over and over and over again for everything. And that also becomes an automatic response when people just want to push something off to the parent or oftentimes the mother. So how would someone intervene?
This is such an important conversation here. First of all, the mother blaming history and psychology, once it's been tested, there's really no real data. That was a persuasive argument that was taken as fact. The truth is, if you step outside of theoretical psychology and you go into behavioral genetics and things that can be tested and replicated that are irrefutable, I see that this is a shocking thing to hear, but parents matter, but they don't make a difference. So what that means is you can't shape and mold a child into a serial killer or a professional anything. There's some startup material there, and that's important to factor in. It doesn't completely eliminate environmental influence. But there's this major component that has been ignored, where shared environments, like two siblings growing up in the same household, they are no similar than perfect strangers. Why? The reason is we talk about these biological underpinnings and differences in the DNA sequence. So, regardless of the environment, certain people are going to gravitate towards certain tendencies and behaviors. A family system, believe it or not, is not powerful enough to make somebody into something. And these are findings that most people don't know exist because we've been really heavily relying on traditional, like psychoanalytic, psychodynamic theories of parenting being the major ingredient in shaping a child. But when you actually test these theories, there's no real evidence for that.
Wow.
But yes, parents get blamed not because, let's say in school systems, teachers might blame parents. This kid is out of control, all my other kids aren't, and there must be something going on at home. Not necessarily. So, what we need to do is we need to figure out what is causing the problem. Because again, there are traits that are excessive without adversity being present. So these kids need to go to a professional who's willing to examine that rather than defaulting straight to something's going on at home and that's why you're doing. Because if you give a kid who has more of a genetic propensity to be aggressive, if you give them empathy and unconditional positive regard at home and in therapy, they're going to laugh at you in their mind. Their behavior is going to be rewarded by that validation. So that's not how you intervene with somebody who has more of a biological aggression or impulsivity. That doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. It's interesting too. I remember really wanting to intervene when I was working at a particular school as a school counselor. I wanted to intervene on behalf of the kids who didn't really know how to protect themselves. And there was some bullying. And sometimes when kids went up to the teacher's desk to ask for help, the teacher would say, sometimes even at a young age, you know what, you need to take care of this. I can't fight all your battles for you, and just go and do the thing. And they had no idea how to do it, but also they didn't have any backup. So they didn't have the courage to do it. But I remember these girls, they could have been guys, but they happened to be girls who were called into the principal's office and were told to be nicer. And then they left the principal's office, and I could see, because there was the glass door, I could see the principal looking very proud of herself that she had really gotten through to these girls. And then the girls left the office and they both did this. They just gave each other kind of a sly high five underneath the table. They got away with it. So there was no shame about being called into the principal's office. It didn't matter, but they knew they'd gotten away with it. I, on the other hand, remember over the PA system, I call it a PA system, that shows how long ago it was. I was already working at the school as the school counselor, and I got called into the principal's office, which had never happened in my life. And I broke out into a sweat, and I remember thinking, what did I do? And now everyone knows I did something wrong. And then I thought, wait, I work here. I just had this guilty conscience, and I needed to make sure I was a good kid. So very different nervous system than these girls who are like, good.
Absolutely.
We're just going to pretend that we care and that we've learned our lesson, and thank you so much. And we don't give a crap about what just happened at all. And now we know that we can get away with it.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about different nervous systems, different ways of regulating. That to me sounds like this covert aggression. Covert aggression, oftentimes there's some stress immunity involved in that. So these kids get away with it longer because they don't have anxiety or stress to trip them up. But it's also, they have like lower arousal in their system. This works for them. It's getting what they want. They bully people into submission, they can intimidate. Now, is this malevolent, evil? No, not necessarily. But it's also not something they're willing to give up because it's working in their favor, and it's not adaptive, it's not healthy, but it's not necessarily that it's, sometimes you have to take the morality out of it and just focus on like, okay, so this is a behavior. Motivating them to change, you're not going to motivate them with guilt or remorse or shame. Those things aren't coming online. That's why they're doing this. So we need to find another way to intervene. And with children, you have to convince them it's in their best self-interest to do it differently Like, look, this is going to affect you long term in a way where you're not going to be getting away with it. You don't just get a slap on the wrist like you do at school. You're going to get fired from jobs. You're going to get alienated because people are not going to like you. You're going to wear out your welcome. You're not going to find a partner who is going to tolerate this. So you kind of have to motivate them in that way. Like, it's better for you to come up with something different rather than it's not really good to bully people. It's not nice. They're going home and they're getting their feelings hurt and it's, you're giving them a stomach ache. They're going to go, wow, I'm that powerful that they have a stomach ache. I'm going to do it even worse tomorrow. And people hear that and they think, oh my gosh, that lack of empathy, that's so callous. Yeah, but telling them that and trying to appeal with morality isn't going to motivate them to change.
No, and that's so interesting too, thinking about what speaks to people and what they're going to lose out on, which I think is something that would speak to a lot of people. They're not going to be able to maintain that level of power because people aren't going to care about what they're saying anymore. They're not going to take them seriously. They're going to be rescinding their power over their lifetime and they're going to be isolated or whatever matters to them. So then you really need to get to know the person to see what would speak to them.
Yeah, you need to gain an understanding of them and then they need to gain an understanding of even if this feels good in the moment, the long-term consequences are really going to cause a lot of quality of life problems down the road. Not every institution tolerates this. You might get away with it in school, in this kind of little world you're in, and maybe at home too. You're enabled because your parents are terrified of you. I've worked with kids whose parents are terrified of them. I'm afraid that if I talk at the wrong moment, my kid is going to do something really bad to their sibling or is going to break something. You can't nurture them out of that. You just can't. They're not going to respond. The more you nurture them, the more they're going to exploit you.
Oh, that's interesting. I remember now when you were talking about stress immunity and then also this lower arousal. Can you describe that? Because that was also something that was really interesting for people now when they watch TV and they see like the politicians who are sort of gliding through, like I was talking about the cult leaders having no wrinkles and almost like their feet don't touch the ground. They're just floating through their lives. What is this about the lower arousal?
When children and teens and adults, they realize that when they commit these acts of antisocial behavior, whether it's an emotional crime or a physical crime, and they realize they're not getting aroused, it actually increases the likelihood of them repeating the behavior. And so they've done longitudinal studies where they've tested children, early preteens, and then in their teens, and then in their young adulthood, and then their adulthood. So, like studies that measure things at particular life stage points spanning 40, 50 years. And antisocial behavior is consistent across the lifespan in individuals who have lower stress hormone excretion levels in their urine. So they're testing their urine and seeing what would normally work somebody up. They're actually very calm when they're committing these heinous crimes or when they're messing with somebody or bullying them or intimidating them. They're not getting this hyper arousal. So it's not a defense mechanism. That's not why they're doing it. Why that's important is you can get far in life. You can enter into positions of power and authority when you're not tripped up by the things that most people are tripped up about. And so this low arousal actually is rewarded socially because these people aren't worked up about things. They can tolerate positions of power that a lot of people, it would wear them out because of all of the stress and things that they would worry about. These people don't worry much about anything. So they're thriving in these positions. I'm not speaking about anybody in particular. I'm just saying historically, that's what they're after, power, and their low arousal permits them to climb the ladder.
I think about fact checking myself before I speak. That matters to me. And if someone points out, oh, no, actually, it was this, you're quoting the wrong quote or something, I'd feel it. I mean, I won't stay up a whole night. Wasn't life or death. I realize that. I try to keep it in perspective, but still, I hold myself up to a certain standard. And now, also, without mentioning certain people, there are people who will just say anything. They'll just get up there and say lots of words that have no bearing on reality or fact. And they're unencumbered by worry about that because they sound so sure and because they have this stress immunity They're not breaking into a sweat. Their lip isn't quivering. Like there are no tells. So how do you know? That's fascinating to me that then these are the people who can sway the masses, but should have the least right, the least amount of right to do so. Just feels like this unfair system. I know I sound like a child talking about it being unfair.
No, well, it's unfair in the sense that it's like we try our best to be productive and contained and civil, and we have this internal pause button that we hit when we're getting worked up, or we react and then later we feel terrible about it, which is very normal because we're wired to survive. And sometimes we feel threatened even when we're not being threatened. But there's this step that's skipped people who have that capacity to self reflect and self monitor and go, maybe I didn't handle that very well. That step is skipped in individuals with stress immunity. They just will say whatever sticks in the moment. They can contradict themselves in the same sentence, and they don't see anything wrong with that because they're just coming up with what is working for them in this present moment. And it doesn't necessarily have to matter or mean something. It's just they're not worked up. So they're just going to say whatever comes to mind and not worry about whether or not it sticks. And that's actually part of the crazy making process is people are like, how could you be this way? Sometimes it's a lack of conscience. Sometimes it's a lack of guilt or remorse or empathy or understanding. So they're not really trying to solve a problem when they do these things. They're trying to just be right.
Right. Trying to be right. And I think intimidate people into being quiet about their reactions to it. That happens within cultic groups. That happens within political movements. I mean, I feel like now with the political movements that we're seeing more in the news, there are these other tells for me. Like if a politician gets a question by a reporter and then in response, they call the question stupid. Now I know that means the reporter was onto something. If that person then gets fired or is barred from the room the next time, that person was onto something, or that person was right, or the person who they asked that question of was uncomfortable in that moment, but couldn't say, that makes me uncomfortable, or I don't know how to answer that, or you're pointing out something that shows that I'm alarming and I don't want people to see that. I think they have this momentary awareness of the possibility of shame. And so they go into retaliatory moves. And maybe that's the tell instead of physiologically looking for something. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, the tells are not overt, but sometimes the response you can like read into it. But like you said, it's not like this overt expression. It's embedded in the response because it's embedded in the thinking structure of these pathological people. Every conversation is a con to position themselves into a place of power. So I'm sure you've heard of the drama triangle, the rescuer, persecutor, victim.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Please talk about that for the audience listening.
Yeah. So I believe it was Cartman who came up with this drama triangle. There's positions on the triangle in interactions. And if one person is in one position, then the other person is in another. So if somebody is self victimizing, then it almost forces somebody else to be in the rescue position or the persecuting position of the victim. Now, this can actually play out in normal healthy relationships when our defense mechanisms kick in. So I don't want to give the impression that it's always pathological, but pathological people intentionally position themselves in the triangle and then intentionally pivot, forcing you to take another position without any heads up. So they'll persecute you. And then if you defend yourself, they will then move to the victim mode. So then you're forced to rescue them when they actually did the persecuting. This is the crazy making part because every time you think you're collaborating or trying to problem solve, even you use the example of a politician being interviewed. If the person who's doing the interview is asking a question to try to solve a problem, then the person who doesn't want to solve the problem is going to switch positions in this triangle to create more problems by saying something like devaluing, like, that's a stupid question. It's not that the question was stupid, it's that you didn't want to answer it because you didn't want to take accountability. But then everybody who's duped by the person is going to think, oh, yeah, they were being unfairly attacked by this journalist. round and round you go. So people who are pathological, they actually communicate by escalating drama. They don't communicate by trying to solve problems.
Oh, so that has so much to do with why people talk about feeling exhausted
Yeah,
in these kinds of relationships. There's so much, yet another hole they have to dig themselves out of, and they're not even quite sure how they got there.
correct.
Fight that broke out between people that was triggered by them. Like, I think even in cults, there's always so much drama and infighting that it's like so many people. I think about cult leaders, how they start the machine going, and then people become cogs in the machine, in the wheel, and they just keep it going. And they learn that in order to be liked by the person in charge, they need to put down other people, or they need to pass information up about other people. They keep the drama and infighting going because it pleases the person in charge. But yeah, just to think about that, about the amount that I'm sure you've seen of the exhaustion that people feel when they're in this.
What's dangerous about that exhaustion is when you're being abused chronically and consistently by somebody, that fatigue actually is often the cause of suicide or suicidal ideation in victims. It's not depression. It's not even low self-worth. It's the fatigue element. This is going to be the way it is. I literally can't survive.
Because it's not your nervous system. It doesn't match you, really. You would love a calmer life.
Yeah. Your nervous system is constantly being hijacked by this coercive behavior and this manipulation and this disempowerment. You can reach the point where you start having thoughts that don't belong to you, but it's like, I don't see a way out of this.
Okay. And so that's a really good thing for people listening to watch out for. There's no way out of this is simply your system saying tilt, like this is too much. And you want to go offline because you can't see another way.
Correct.
But that there are other ways out.
There are, but you've been conditioned to believe there aren't because the person who's typically doing this to you is benefiting from you believing you're the problem. Almost creates this feedback loop of being stuck in the fatigue mode. And you keep thinking, redirecting it to, this is me. They're fine, especially the stress immune ones. They're not rattled. So it's like they look like they're not going through any trouble. It's not because they're right and you're wrong. It's because they don't feel things and you do.
Incredible. It's reminding me of something I wrote down, and I was going to put this potentially one day in a book, so it might still be, but I always wanted to call it the 3-year-long letter. There was a person who came to see me who had wanted to leave his guru, who he was raised in the group, but he could see what it was doing to him. And it wasn't something he would have chosen for himself. But in order to leave, you had to write a letter to the guru, and the guru had to approve your reasoning for leaving. And so he had been working on this and rewriting because it kept being denied for 3 years by the time he came to see me. And what he didn't realize was that he didn't have to explain himself at all. And none of this was necessary, but he wanted to do the right thing. So he was exhausting himself, and he brought all of the different samples of the letters and with all of the different edits that he got back, redlining them. This just shows that you are this, that you don't appreciate all that I've done. This just shows you don't care about the mission, all the things. Okay, now let me rewrite it. I remember saying to him, what if I said to you, you can't leave my office until you give me a good enough reason? Or if I said, there's the door, just open it and go, and I will wish you well. How would you feel? So at the end of he didn't quite believe me that he could still be a good person and just go. But he forgot he had constitutionally protected rights. He had freedom of movement. He didn't know that. And he was sure that some deity would punish him forever for not coming up with a good enough reason. So I just helped him, I think, hopefully see that he was being tortured. And if he wanted just to hand me the letters and just really free himself of the weight of it and just go. But that was just so interesting because that was his life, thinking about it, working on it. And he didn't move himself forward. He didn't have a moment of calm. And the person who was doing that to him didn't care. He was so ego-driven.
That's heartbreaking to hear, but also I'm grateful that he found you, because that's a remarkable intervention and perspective and support. And that is exactly what happens. I describe that in my traumatic cognitive dissonance book, in the sense of people being frozen in defeat and they're looking for an answer that doesn't exist. That actually really applies to that persecutor role in the drama triangle, because the person is saying, the cult leader is saying, you didn't do this right. So there's this justify. It's in the superficial like veneer of they're justifying why they're trying to teach them a moral lesson or a value lesson. But really what they're doing is punishing. And there's no way out. There's never a right answer. He can write the letter for 3 years plus, and they're not looking for him to come up with the right answer. But there's this hope that's instilled that maybe I can get it right. And it's an endless trap, and that's torture.
Yeah, I said, if someone doesn't want you to go, then no amount of reasoning or fancy wording is gonna. I said, it would be like if you said, I'll give you $20 for your dog. And I said, or your son, your daughter, whatever. And I said, no, how about 30? If you come up with just the right amount, no, there is no amount. There's no conversation we can have here where you're going to get something from me. But that's just not told. That is so interesting. Frozen in defeat. It's another one of these quotables, a Peter quotable that is so amazing that I'm writing down, because that is a terrible feeling. And this seems to, I'm sure, happen a lot in the work, especially that you do.
Yeah, that one is a quote from someone, a client I worked with that I printed in the book. But it's interesting. I get very emotional and protective of clients who've gone through this, because they say things that I thought when I was in it. And it's like, I've said that so many times, frozen in defeat. You get in these circular arguments where there's no off ramp because the person isn't really looking to problem solve with you. I remember in a situation I was in that was pretty bad. The person was doing this, I can't stand you. I hate it here. I want to leave, and I'm not going anywhere. So it's like, you're a reasonable person and you're a therapist. You're like, help me understand this. You hate it here. You can't stand the sight of me, and you're not going anywhere. Why would you stay? That's where you fall into the drama trap, because that question is not worth asking, but you're just trying your best to be a rational human being because the contradiction is so blatant. Really, what they're saying is, if I can punish you, I will. So there's no way out. But again, when you keep erring on the side of no one does this on purpose, that's when you stay stuck in the trap, because people do this on purpose. And that's one of the hardest things to reconcile and come to terms with about human nature, is there are some people who do intentional, conscious and deliberate harm to others. It's not always a defense. Sometimes it's an offense.
It's very jarring and it's depressing.
Yeah.
It's really hard to look at that. And I think too, with the situation that you were in, and that just, oh, I'm so sorry that you were in that situation. And yes, I think a lot of us come to this work because of relationships that were not lovely, but also thinking that here, that leaves you in a position of then needing to be the one to go. And then would you be abandoning this person who you now know has issues, or you feel like you've hurt in some way? That adds to the trap. Who's going to take the action step? Are you going to feel like you're a bad person for taking it?
Right. And then also there's this behavioral priming of you can't leave even if you wanted to. So there's that element. Or in some cases, if you leave, you have to give up what you've earned. Maybe it's you're living in your house and they're an imposter. So if you leave, you have to give them your house. I mean, I've heard stories like this where the only way out is if I give them something they didn't earn and they're willing to take it. So it puts you in this terrible, impossible position. And even if you do decide to leave, yeah, like you said, you're going to be plagued with guilt that's unwarranted. Like you've abandoned somebody, you didn't fight hard enough for it. This level of coercion and subterfuge and manipulation, they've done studies that show this is just as damaging physically. The structural and functional damage of your brain and nervous system from this type of emotional abuse is consistent with physical abuse. It's on par with the same damage. And sadly, none of this is recognized in justice systems yet.
It is quite behind. I mean, they're still trying to understand the idea of consent. So we have a lot of ways to go. But I think that there is something so interesting about that, about really checking in with yourself and seeing how debilitated you've become and giving that credence to know then that you don't have to adopt other people's or your abuser's language around that it's that you're weak or something. You're reacting to this horrible situation. And I also think there's so many diagnoses that people are given during this time where the abuser will say, see, I had to deal with someone who's depressed. That's why, or I had to deal with someone who has anxiety. But it's situational depression. It's situational anxiety. It's like you're caught in
Yes.
this.
A lot of the diagnoses that get thrown out from these pathological people are personality disorder diagnoses. They'll tell you, oh, you're a narcissist. You're such a narcissist, or you're borderline. You're so inconsistent. It's like, first of all, I do want to say I get a lot of heat when I talk about these disorders because people think I'm speaking in an insulting or pejorative manner. I never use those terms to insult anyone. They're clinical terms. I'm a therapist. I get to use those terms. I use it the way it's meant to be used, just like an oncologist uses terminology that's the way it's meant to be used. But there are pathological people who do use those terms in a very insulting manner. And they're actually the one who fits the bill for that disorder, but they externalize the blame and they feel entitled to use those terms as weapons. My emotionally dysregulated partner is not emotionally dysregulated because I'm tormenting them. They're just borderline, which is horrible to do to somebody.
Horrible. And then they can be the victim in the story.
Correct.
And reach out to that person's family. Like, luckily they have me. I'm going to hang with them and be there and suffer through being in a relationship with someone who has these disorders. Wow. So I hear you. And hopefully people will hear you clearly here too, that you're talking about not the credibility or making light of the diagnostic characteristics and the diagnosis itself, but just that it can be reframed, displaced, turned around on the victim of the perpetrator. And they can be seen as having these disorders, or they can be seen as the abuser. That I hear a lot too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very confusing.
The abusers can do this. They have this incredible way of convincing people that they're the victim. Or even like in your case, the cult leader can convince the cult that this person they're victimizing actually abused them and they need to be removed or they need to be punished.
Exactly. So with this traumatic cognitive dissonance, and so much of this is so difficult to make sense of. In fact, there are people who have told me I was able to get out of this relationship I was in, or I was able to actually get out of the cult that I was in because I got COVID and I couldn't show up, or I had a few days away. And I started with that distance without the constant reinforcement of the message and the environment with people in it who also reinforced the message of the person in charge. I could suddenly come to a little bit, which was interesting, was having that time away. I was going to ask about how people get out of that traumatic cognitive dissonance, how they help see. And I know sometimes just pulling yourself away, if you have the luxury, not everyone has that. What are some other ways that people can address this cognitive dissonance so they can really see what's happening to them?
So I think something that a lot of people run into is there's a cognitive understanding that there's something wrong, but there's not a felt sense in the body that's in alignment with that intellectual thought process. And so getting those two things in line, I tell people your nervous system and your core belief system need to be on the same page. They get out of alignment when you're being manipulated because cult leaders and abusers, and you can have a cult of one, a narcissistic or psychopathic person, they are banking on you believing things that aren't true about yourself, about them, and about the relationship dynamics. So identifying beliefs that were implanted and coerced is one of the first steps I tell people. Start writing down what you believe about yourself, the relationship, and the other person. Oftentimes, those are completely inaccurate because they were implanted. Then you can do some other like trauma interventions that have been effective by introducing new neural pathways and desensitizing the nervous system, removing the emotional charge. I mean, there's all kinds of interventions. I go over some of them in my book, but it's not a one size fits all. Some people really respond to one, other people respond to something different. But I would say the two components to start really zeroing in on are the symptoms and the sensations that are taking place in your nervous system, and then those accompanying core beliefs that have been implanted but don't belong to you. That's a good place to start.
Okay. So the core beliefs for people who were born and raised in cults, they have a bit of a harder time in some respects. They don't have a community to go back to where they can say, is this true about me? Or do you remember this about me? Kids who were raised, let's say, in some of these Bible-based cultic groups where if they weren't able to sit still for 5 hours at the age of 2 or 3 and then told that they're bad kids or filled with Satan or whatever else, they don't know about norms within child development and expectations developmentally. And so it really does help for them to learn about child development and physiological development and social development, and spilling is okay and it doesn't mean you're evil and all of those things. And not being able to sit still doesn't mean something about you psychologically, spiritually. But how can people get a sense when they've had kind of a life already outside of this relationship? How do they get reoriented to what's true about them and what's not? What have you found that's helpful?
I think one of the most helpful things is a trusting and validating community to replace the dysfunctional one. I think there's a lot to be said for people tend to lose self compassion when they're trying to care for themselves out of a situation like this because they think they're being selfish or they think they're betraying something. When you hear a lot of other people in a community tell your same story with similar language and similar symptoms and similar experiences, you feel less alienated. You might not necessarily gain containment or trust in those communities, but you're gonna get validation that I'm not the only one. How many people are speaking my language and saying the same thing? I'm not alone in this. So there might be something to this idea that everyone's telling the same story. So I think that's very helpful. I've seen people struggle in individual settings and then they join a community, and then that just seems to really give them permission to start doing the individual work.
Oh, interesting. Community is so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So important. I'm wondering also just about this conversation about heredity, because as with anything, and also I guess this is to prepare the listeners that you're not saying something that is black and white, but there are people who were asking, and I know this is something you address, to what degree are some of these traits hereditary? So nature versus nurture, nature and nurture argument. And again, we're talking about human beings and not machines. And so there's always going to be a gradation. But when you see from generation to generation, almost this sort of smugness that I see sometimes even on TV, where I see multi-generations within a certain family. And I wonder, did they learn that? Or is that part of their wiring or a little bit of both? What do you think?
It's always both and. So what we need to understand about when I use the term genetic or hereditary or heritable, we're not talking about, there's no such thing as a gene that is a narcissistic gene or a cult leader gene or a psychopath. There are differences in the DNA sequence that contribute to differences in the levels of human traits. All traits are heritable, even the good ones. It's not necessarily that genetic means if my ex is a narcissist, that my children are going to be a narcissist or half a narcissist. That's not how it works. The traits that make up the disorders that we diagnose, there's aggression, there's grandiosity, there's manipulativeness, there's antagonism, there's hostility, there's introversion, there's extroversion, there's neuroticism. These are traits that we've created descriptive terms for because they're universal in the human species. Some people have more or less of them. You don't qualify it as it's there or it's not. You quantify it. How much of this is present? And then how much of this presence is interfering in quality of life, social, how much impairment is it causing? How much exploitation is it causing? There's no such thing as a genetic borderline personality disorder or a genetic psychopathy. There's such a thing as the traits that are consistent with these disorders are human traits. So we are going to inherit them. And we all are going to inherit differences that can be more or less contributing to the risk of this presentation being more hardwired, let's say. But even non-pathological traits are heritable. There's some people who are just inherently more introverted than they are extroverted. Now, you put them in an extroverted situation and they're going to modify the environment to feel more introverted. And that's what narcissists do. They select environments where they can be more manipulative and exploitative because that's kind of their baseline. So we're talking about at that level, it's not personal. It's not even a moral issue. It just is, but it's still not okay. It's paradoxical. It's like they are just being themselves and they can't be that way.
Yeah, very interesting. I wonder, is there a link between introversion and extroversion? Are people who are narcissistic more of one than another or not necessarily?
No, because people who have pathological traits also have non-pathological traits. Some people's grandiosity is more internal, it's more covert or closeted. They might have a tendency to be more introverted and isolated, and others are more extroverted and their grandiosity is more obvious because of that. But what we really want to focus on is not the expression of it. We want to focus on the presence of it. One of the central features, I would say the main feature of a narcissist is the grandiosity, the lack of equality. How that gets expressed can be a number of different ways. There's been narcissistic individuals who are brilliant writers and they spend all their time alone. But if you cross them or threaten them in some way, then you're going to start to see that expression of the grandiosity. And then there are others that put themselves out there. So you're going to see it in a more overt way.
Right. And I wonder also when people now have this sense of narcissists having that they get easily injured and they have this narcissistic injury and then they want to injure you back. There is this space made for them to first have an issue and that it comes from insecurity, which is how a lot of people have been taught to look at it. And it may not be the case. And it may not be also something you need to give them a pass on just because, even if that were the case. So looking at the origin of it and seeing that it isn't necessarily all from that same injured child place might help people not just defer to the narcissist as having needs. And so you shouldn't be upset with them.
Yeah, the insecurity debate, people even define narcissism differently. A lot of people define narcissism as this false self mask that had to develop as a result of not being good enough or not getting your needs met early on. Everything is a front, and then they have this very low self-esteem and low self-worth, and all of it's a compensation for that. Those people exist. I wouldn't actually call that narcissism, though. To me, narcissism is trait-based, and then there's this enduring pattern of thinking, feeling, and behaving based on these traits, and then looking for environments that cater to those traits. That type of narcissism, there's not insecurity. There's actually an unearned high self-regard and high self-esteem. And it's a sincere belief that they're superior. It's not a compensation. And I've sat with individuals who have admitted that. A psychoanalyst might say, oh, well, they're just defending against things. They don't know how they really feel. And it's like, not necessarily.
I don't know if I mentioned this last time. I'm just writing down the word unearned, which is so pivotal here because there's so many people who have earned the right to feel confident about themselves or even potentially superior, I suppose, if they know more than someone else or everyone else in the room about a subject. But it just wouldn't even occur to them to turn their level of ability or knowledge into feeling superior, which is very interesting. There was a person who came to me and said that he wants to get some help with his narcissism, which was interesting because he could see that it was really impacting his world. Met for a couple sessions and then it became too hard for him to continue to be open to hearing some of the things that I was noticing and saying, but I respected the fact that he was trying to give it a go and maybe he'll come back. But he said that he does some tests to see if he can control people. And I don't recall if I mentioned this. He would sometimes purposely bump into people. And if they apologized to him, he knew that he could get away with something else with them. And then he would set his sights on them, which was really interesting. And it's a bit of an unfair black and white way of looking at people because I think so many of us are socialized to say we're sorry because we might not have been paying attention and it could have been our fault. But still, he was setting up situations to test.
So that's such a great example for this discussion because he's going out of his way to select an environment where he can express his narcissistic traits. He's not a passive recipient of something and then receiving an injury. He's exploiting.
Yes, great word.
That black and white all or nothing, if I get an apology versus, oh, there's so much gray area with what an apology means, like you just said. We're socially conditioned, culturally conditioned. So they have this rigid black dichotomous thinking. This is what makes them so difficult to work with because if they feel slighted, even when they're not, they're going to drop out of treatment or they're going to discard a relationship or they're going to devalue someone or they're going to justify mistreating someone because they really don't have the gray area, the middle ground that's necessary to be flexible enough to relate.
Yeah. And then there's the question about love. Do they love? Can they love in the same way? Can they attach in the same way? And that might also be different for different people. But I wonder about that, about affection and how genuine it is.
I go over this in my Nature and Nurture of Narcissism book, and I've received some pushback on this, but oftentimes narcissists will say score on an attachment inventory. They'll score in an unclassified manner because I think there are deficiencies in their intimacy and their interpersonal relating that make it impossible for them to attach in the way that we've defined as attachment. Because they're so self-referential and they're seeking personal gain at the expense of others, I don't think they love in the same way that we define love. Now, that doesn't mean that all of them don't have any feelings. I think narcissists actually have a broad range of feelings. They just aren't consistent with what we call normal feelings. I think if they say that they love someone, I love my kids, you can believe them, but it's not going to be the same love as it's defined by two collaborative. It's not going to be that reciprocity that's necessary for love and bonding.
Got it. And the self-referential piece of this is so interesting because it really does bar outside or external insight and learning. So if you can talk more about that and how limiting that is, but also how if someone just looks inward, then they're just going to get the information that they feed themselves. And it's going to be skewed based on their needs or their insecurities or whatever else. Yeah, if you can talk about that piece, that's fascinating.
People that are pathologically narcissistic actually block out other people in conversations. They're really like mental editing to be self-referential. So it's almost like what works for them is if you hold up a mirror and you erase yourself, they are feeling gratified. They are feeling like this is a worthwhile situation. The moment you take the mirror off your face and you start showing that you are a person with needs and individuality and autonomy, that's when the devaluing starts. So relationships serve the purpose of they're only important or interested in a relationship in reference to themselves.
And they'd be interested in reference to themselves because they would get certain needs met.
Yeah, they get the admiration from the other person. They get the idealization. They get the special treatment. It's like a narcissist will devalue you if you're too tired to make them dinner one night. You might have been on this pedestal this whole time because you were making them dinner every night. And then the moment that you're sick, you're like, I just don't have the energy. Now they go, oh, you're not what I thought you were. Because they weren't appreciative of the dinners. They were expecting the dinners. And the moment you don't give them what they expect, now you are on the road to discard.
On the road to discard. This is fascinating because it ties in. Oh my goodness. These conversations can go so many different places. It ties in to people I work with who have left cults or who have left these kinds of relationships who say basically in a whole variety of words that are different based on their experience, but the message is, I never accrued points that stuck. It didn't matter what I had proven about myself before. It was still a game of chutes and ladders. I still went back down to the bottom, no matter what. It didn't matter that I had moved across the country to be with this person, or I'd given up my work or my family, my friends. But because I didn't greet them first when I came in the door, but I pet the dog, that was it.
That's right. There are no gold stars collected in these relationships. It's a blank slate every interaction. Those things moving across the country for someone, for a narcissist, that's an expectation. That's what you should have done anyway, because look who you get to be with. Now, it's not always overtly said that way, but that's what they believe. Of course, somebody would drop everything and move across the country for me. Why wouldn't they? So if you pet the dog first, you are insulting them. That's how they see these things. It's like you're a servant in their royal court. They don't get to play by the rules, but you have to. The king gets to break the rules. The king makes the rules, or the queen. They make the rules, so they get to break them. So there's not reciprocity in the rules and agreements of a relationship. They get to cheat, you don't. They get to stay out all night, and you don't. But these are literally expectations that they have. And what causes the injury is because they expect that they're going to be met. The injury happens when they're not. They're floored. I can't believe you didn't make me dinner tonight. I can't believe you pet the dog before you kissed me when you got home from work. This is a sincere conviction that they are superior. People don't really think this way, but they really do.
How much more confusing it is, too, when it's not voiced, when you don't know that someone has the how dare yous. They are keeping it to themselves and you don't know why you're being punished or why the fact that you didn't make them dinner is being brought up over and over again or in front of other people. Oh, I love my wife. Even remember that time you didn't make me dinner, but I forgive you.
That's where this idealization comes in. It never occurred to them to tell you these are the rules because they just really truly believed you knew already. Narcissism is grandiosity. It's not insecurity. It's not low self-esteem. Is their self-esteem fragile because they're kind of an empty suit? Absolutely. But that's not the same thing as suffering from low self-esteem. They don't think at my core, I am bad, I am rotten. They really don't. There are disorders where people think that way about themselves. I personally don't call them narcissists. Narcissism is this overinvestment in one's image at the expense of any authentic self, but it's not necessarily a compensation. It's not necessarily an inferiority complex.
Oh, wow. But they can exhibit some insecurities at times and need to be reminded, I guess, of their wonderfulness.
Yeah, but insecurity and shame and low self-esteem aren't core concepts of narcissism. They're core concepts of the human condition. They're not having low self-esteem and insecurity because they're narcissists. They're having those things because they're human. Even a psychopath can be shamed or humiliated if they don't get what they want. But the ones with the stress immunity, they can still be shamed and humiliated, but they're not ashamed because they're a psychopath. They're ashamed because people get humiliated.
So if people listening are in a situation now where they are feeling stuck, where they feel frozen in defeat, and also have some of this cognitive dissonance where they feel, or maybe they've already left once and then they went back because they felt bad or they felt responsible or there's something that feels conflictual internally. I wonder if we can go back to what you were talking about finding the thing that would speak to the other person as a motivator, like leaving a narcissist, letting them let you go, basically, might come in the form of making them feel like they deserve to be with someone better. I mean, I don't know how you'd get into that mindset, but I know some people try to figure out how to have that conversation without being roped back in.
That's a tough one. I think it depends on other circumstances, like if there's intimate partner violence or anything like that. But if you're in a manipulative situation where you're physically safe, I think there's things that you can do to become boring to them because they're prone to boredom and they need this stimulation. That's one of the reasons too why conversations become dramatic is because a normal problem-solving conversation is irritating to them because there's nothing exciting about it. There's no risk in that. It's too conventional. They're sensation seekers and stimulation seekers. So if you become boring, the colloquial, informal term of this is like the gray rock thing. If you sort of become indifferent to them, sometimes that will get them to look elsewhere for something that's more stimulating. And then that can give you a window of an out. But it's really not that simple because the coercive control and all of that entrancement, it immobilizes you from making the decision even to try to become boring. My suggestion is always you got to meet with someone who knows what they're talking about. And I think also joining a community of support where someone's going to believe you, because a lot of this is unbelievable for most people. A lot of people think, why don't you just leave if it's so bad? They don't understand the behavioral priming, and the colloquial term is the trauma bonding. People don't understand these things. They think it's really a conscious choice to stay and a conscious choice to go. And we both know that's just not true.
Absolutely right. This has been incredible. I know also that people wrote in after hearing our interview and talked about having bought your books and have found them to be pivotal, really useful, practically useful, and also very supportive of their experience and also offering practical guidance. And I mean, you hit all the points of things that people were looking for, which is really incredible. And so, was there anything more that you wanted to make sure to mention to help us understand this? And then I want people to know where to find you and your books and your work.
Thank you. Well, I'm honored that people have felt that the books were beneficial and helpful. I would say an important takeaway is it's not about who you are or how you are when it comes to these relationships. It's what the social predator is capable of. Eliminate these self-pathologizing ideas of it's my attachment style, it's my codependency, which I don't believe is a thing. Talk about that later. It's in my book, but it's not about I don't set boundaries well. If you set good boundaries, someone like this is going to violate the good boundaries. So this self-pathologizing, I think, is a big problem because you might go into therapy or seek help thinking that if I change these things about myself, the relationship will improve. And that's just categorically untrue if you're really dealing with a pathological person and a manipulator. So let yourself off the hook. Even if you do have things you need to work on, those aren't the things that are going to cure the relationship. That's what I would leave people with.
I love that. I'd love to talk to you about codependency. I've always had an issue with it, actually. It's interesting. Okay. Where can people find you and your work and your books?
My website is drpetersalerno.com. I have books on Amazon. I have an Instagram account, Dr. Peter Salerno. I have a YouTube channel that I don't put much on. That's where you can find me.
That's really wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for synthesizing so much of this information into these nuggets, into these bite-sized pieces so that we can understand them in different ways and talk about them in new ways. It's this ever-expanding amount of knowledge out there about this, and some of the things are going to be on track and some are not. And it's good to understand what is scientifically based and what is just chatter, because there's a lot of it out there. So it's really great to have experts like you to be able to clarify and help us understand not only the interactions, but also the chemistry of it, which I think gives it a lot of salience, a lot of credibility. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One more thing before you go. Thank you. Thank you to Peter for this wonderful conversation. I had a chance also to ask him some questions that some of the people who had listened to the first episode had after they heard the first episode, and they were curious about having him go into certain subjects a little more. They had questions from their own life, their own history, things that they had been curious about that I was able to weave into my conversation with him. So I hope that felt satisfying, specifically for the people who had asked certain questions of me to pass along to him, which I did today. And for all of you to be able to really get this sense of the subject in, I think, a wonderfully researched way and a wonderfully nuanced way. He sees things slightly differently than other people who have presences on social media and within this realm and who follow these topics. I like that he finds his own way of seeing things and doesn't need to see them the way other people do. I am also happy to be able to have someone to commiserate with on so many different subjects and to learn with, learn from. There is something so important that he brought up, which is this interesting distinction. And the distinction when we're talking about narcissists is this idea of them being grandiose, but not based on anything real. And the way he talks about it is that it's unearned grandiosity. I love that term, unearned grandiosity. So when people just feel really special, when people think they are very special, when they think they're superior, when they think they are better than, and you're thinking, based upon what exactly? Because nothing's really standing out. There are people who will develop their own world, which is taking it to a whole other level that cult leaders do. And that really malignant narcissistic partners and controlling partners will do, where they have people who follow them, who listen to them, who will do anything they say, and in a realm where, or in a relationship where, they've made their own rules. They've set their own agenda. They have their own code of honor, code of ethics, code of morals, and their own language. They have their own personality. The relationship takes on its own personality. The cult group takes on its own personality. They can then be the king or the queen of their realm, the realm that they have developed that is separate from the world outside. And I think they do this in a way that's separate from the world outside because on some level, they might know in a way that they wouldn't necessarily admit that they wouldn't be able to have this level of success in the quote unquote real world, or they wouldn't be able to have a relationship with someone who is this devoted or is this intimidated by them or is willing to do whatever they say with someone who they haven't manipulated, with someone who they haven't broken down into being that compliant and being that gaslit and confused. And so when you have people who feel very, very special and superior and might to a great degree believe that about themselves, but you're wondering why, then you have this unearned grandiosity. It is something also that people with this personality will do everything to hold on to, because to a great degree, that's all they have. I have often said, as I talked to Peter about this, that a lot of cult leaders, a lot of controllers, controlling partners, malignant narcissists, they really would not survive in the wild. They need people to do their bidding. They need people to do the dirty work. They need people to take care of the finances, whatever it is that they're setting up. They need people to be their henchmen and henchwomen to get their hands dirty for them. They often don't know how to do anything. And not only would they not survive in the wild, because really the talent they have is manipulating others, and that's kind of it. They also wouldn't often survive just in mainstream society. They wouldn't survive in a 9-to-5 job. They wouldn't survive, again, in a healthy relationship with someone who has self-confidence and is able to hold on to their self-confidence no matter all the attempts to break it down. And so there are people who really are more grandiose, and you might think that they deserve it. You might think that they have reason to feel that they are superior because they're so smart, they're so able. They have gifted the world with so many wonderful things. But the truth is, when you talk to people who are the recipients of Nobel Prizes, when you talk to people who have an IQ that's off the charts, when you talk to people who have achieved so much and who have done so much for the world, very often a character trait that you find with them is not so much grandiosity, but humility, where they think about what else they need to be doing and what else they could have done. And so the ones who have grandiosity are often the ones, not always, but often the ones who don't really deserve to feel so superior. They just need it like the air they breathe. They need it to survive. And one of the things that is important to remember is that it's not your job to supply them with that oxygen, because that just makes them feel more entitled and more superior, which makes them treat other people with more condescension, but also more cruelty at times, because they do feel that they have earned the right to take control. They've earned the right to mistreat people. That's when you get into the disorder. That's when you know you're not really dealing with someone who's healthy. They say you can tell a lot about a person by how they deal with the power that they've been given or the power that they've taken. So notice that. Notice if somebody has a sense of themselves as being so superior, but also even if they do think that they are smarter than or better than, what do they do with it? And how do they give themselves then permission, because of that, to mistreat others who don't deserve it? Thank you again to Dr. Salerno, and thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you next week.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @Indoctrination Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at @_indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.
Life is a workout, and Smoothie King is here to help you power through. Whether you're grinding out bicep curls or muscling the couch across the living room, crushing morning miles, or sprinting through back-to-back meetings, Smoothie King has fuel to help you maximize your workouts, own your recovery, and elevate your game. Give your body the energy, protein, and power it needs with a lineup of delicious smoothies made to help you conquer your goals. Only at Smoothie King.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.